On April 12, 2014, a massive forest fire destroyed thousands of homes in Valparaiso, Chile. 100 men were reported kidnapped in Pakistan. And Backstreet Boys singer Nick Carter wed his longtime girlfriend in Santa Barbara, California. And in a small display case in Brisbane, Australia, in the hallway of the University of Queensland, something truly amazing happened. A drop fell. Not just any drop, obviously, but a drop of pitch from one of the longest-running science experiments in the world. Here's why that might have been the most important thing that happened that day. We tend to plan our lives in the short term, rarely thinking ahead more than a few years. But plenty of the forces that affect our lives operate on a much longer time scale. So in order to measure those, scientists have to think long term. And some of the experiments they devise to measure that long term wind up taking more than a lifetime to complete. And I feel like the scientists who start these kinds of experiments they're kind of a special breed. You know, they start a scientific ball rolling for future generations to pick up. There's the saying, blessed are those who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit. So these are people who have a question that they want answered, but they know they'll never have that answer, but they make the effort so that the people in the future will have that answer. And I think that's cool. Now, some of the examples I'm going to talk about here, they do stretch the definition of experiment a bit. Because a useful scientific experiment usually involves a tightly controlled setup. Like, for example, if I threw a paper airplane in this room, you know, I can control the air currents and whatnot, the air pressure even if I wanted to. I can get it to do what I want. I can't do that if I just toss it in my backyard, right? So to set up a controlled experiment that lasts for decades or even centuries, it's pretty hard. That's something that will be obvious in this first example, which holds the Guinness World Record for the longest running lab experiment, which looks like this. Exciting. This oily glob hanging from a funnel in a bell jar doesn't really look like much. Not a lot happening in our time frame, but over the last century, a lot has happened. What you're seeing is the 10th drop of this vat of sticky pitch, slowly, very slowly making its way through the funnel. This is the famous pitch drop experiment at the University of Queensland in Australia. This is the live stream of a case that's currently held in the Parnell building, which is named after Thomas Parnell, who was the school's first professor of physics, and he started the pitch drop experiment in 1927. What he did was he heated a pitch sample and poured it into a sealed funnel. He let the pitch settle for 3 years before he snipped off the end of the funnel, and then the point was to see just, how long it took for the pitch to drop into the beaker below the funnel, and then see how long for a second drop, and a third, and so on. And to give you an idea of just how long it takes for that to happen, Parnell only lived long enough to see 2 drops. Actually, I say that he saw them, but he actually only saw what had happened after the fact. Actually, this is crazy to me. In 96 years, the pitch has dropped 9 times. And it's never been seen. Nobody has ever actually seen this drop. Every single one has been missed, with maybe an asterisk on the last one, but we'll get to that. A total of 5 falls went unseen between 1930 and 1961 when Parnell's successor found the PDE setup just kind of sitting in a cupboard. His name was Professor John Mainstone, and he thought it was interesting enough to put it out on display for everybody to look at it. And then he monitored and maintained this experiment for the next 52 years. But like Parnell, he managed to miss every single one of the drops. Pitch gonna do what pitch gonna do. Pitch don't care about your schedule. Pitch please! Pitch drop 6 fell on a weekend when nobody was around. Pitch drop 7 fell while a scientific conference was going on at the school that day, and it actually happened during a lull. So Mainstone was actually watching over it, and then he decided he was gonna step away for a second to get a drink, and when he came back, it had fallen. Seriously. Fastest. Australian for That was in 1988. So 12 years later, in the year 2000, they actually had a video camera on the experiment to finally, after 70 years, catch this drop happening. And then there was a blackout, and that's when it fell. Honestly, at this point, it kind of seems like the pitch was doing it on purpose. Professor Mainstone died in 2013, and 8 months later, drop 9 fell, and this time, it was caught on camera. Finally. Thousands of online viewers watched the drop fall, but Professor Mainstone, who had spent over 50 years waiting to see it, missed it again. It's kind of tragic, really. So now we're on the 10th drop, and it could happen any day now. So if you want to see it for yourself, they have a handy website set up called the10thwatch.com. Wouldn't it be crazy if it happened while I was recording this? It's looking pretty swollen. That's a swole pitch. And this chart on Wikipedia gives you an idea of how long it might take. There's some interesting things to point out here. First of all, you can see that the third drop took place in less time than the first two, keeping in mind that the first two drops happened in a cupboard and then it was put on display, so the conditions were different. It was also moved, so maybe it was jostled a bit. Also, the length between drops has slowly increased over time, and there's a jump in the length after 1988. That's because the Parnell building installed air conditioning that year. Air conditioning made the pitch cooler, therefore more viscous. Now, another reason the length of time between them has increased slowly over time, it makes sense because with every drop, the mass of the pitch above it decreases, meaning that the force pushing the pitch down is lessened, therefore it takes longer. So if you look at the percentage increase from the 8th drop to the 9th drop, that's about a 9% increase. Apply that to the 161 months from the last one, and you're looking at 175 months for this drop, the 10th drop. Since we're 142 months into the 10th drop, by this estimation, we've got another maybe 33 months or so to go, which would put the 10th drop at around December 2028. Place your bets on when the 10th drop will fall down in the comments. Or on Kalshi if you're stupid. But yeah, just to be safe while I'm recording, I'm gonna leave this up on screen here and check back on it. Make sure it doesn't do it while we're recording this, because that would be crazy. So you may be asking, like, what is the point of this experiment in the first place? Like, what is pitch? Pitch is like a general term for several substances that are basically byproducts of distilling petroleum, coal tar, or plant resin. They've been mostly used as waterproofing agents throughout history. Ancient boats were sealed with pitch, for example, and traces of pitch were found on wine and olive oil containers from back in the day. The Egyptians even used pitch on mummies. That's an interesting story, actually. When Arabs in the Middle Ages first came across mummies, they thought that their dark color came from bitumen. Bitumen, you might have figured out, is a type of pitch. Can't find a bitumen. And the Arabic word for bitumen is mum, hence mummy. The thing is, there's been a bit of a debate over the decades as to whether or not the Egyptians actually used bitumen as an ingredient in their mummification process. So for a while, the common knowledge was that the word mummy was a misattribution of the word mum, and it wasn't correct. But not too long ago, some researchers used gas chromatography on the mummies, and they determined that actually, yes, it was bitumen that they were using to make these mummies. Or at least it was used as an ingredient. So it turns out those early Arab traders were right after all, and the word mummies is an accurate term. I should call this mess cam, because dear God. To this day, pitch is still used to waterproof ships, and it's almost certainly what's keeping your attic dry, because it's a common sealant on roofs. It's also an ingredient in asphalt, various dyes, and even some battery electrodes. But scientists have always been interested with the strangeness involved in how pitch looks and behaves. Like at room temperature, pitch appears solid. It just looks like a kind of a rock, but it still flows, as proved in the pitch drop experiment. So even though it looks like a solid, scientists classify pitch as a highly viscous liquid. Viscosity is the measure of how much a liquid resists flowing. So the viscosity of pitch is estimated to be at least 100 billion times that of water. Yeah, there's a whole branch of physics devoted to studying how materials flow and deform over time. It's called rheology. And rheology is important. It has implications in everything from manufacturing plastics to predicting what path lava will take after an eruption. So yeah, the next time that you're airlifted from a volcano, spare a thought for the self-sacrificing scientists who stare at drops of pitch so you can stay safe. So if you want to look at it like this, this whole pitch drop experiment thing, since pitch is technically a liquid, the pitch drop experiment it's kind of like watching a drop of water stretched out over 12 years. I think even the slow-mo guys can't pull that off. Okay, so earlier I kind of qualified the pitch drop experiment as being the longest running laboratory experiment, according to Guinness. But the longest running overall experiment is the broad bulk experiment at Rothamsted Experimental Station in England. It's an agricultural experiment, so it's outside, so there's only so much that the scientists can control. But that's kind of the point. Broad bulk started in 1843, a year after John Barnett Laws patented a new fertilizer. So he wanted to test this new fertilizer, and he wanted to test out other fertilizers. So he and a friend grew and tested crops for over 40 years. And more than a century later, scientists are still collecting data from Rothamsted, including Broad Bulk Field where wheat was planted. The field is split into 20 strips, one of which is the control where no fertilizer has ever been applied. The other 19 strips have been treated with different levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And in 1968, the experiment was expanded to include treatments like herbicides and other chemicals, but the goal remains the same, just understanding crop growth so that farmers can increase their yields. And plenty of discoveries have actually been made at Rothamsted. For example, it's been shown that most plants get their nitrogen from the soil and not from the air. And all the data from Rothamsted has allowed scientists to basically see how ecosystems adapt to the use of chemicals. I mean, it's kind of staggering when you think about it, that these crops grown using data from this one farm have probably sustained millions, if not billions, of lives. You know what, let's check back on the pitch drop experiment real quick. Yeah, still there. Of course, not every long-running experiment is as impactful as something that feeds billions of people. Take the device powered by the Clarendon dry pile, sometimes known as the Oxford Electric Bell. It's a bell connected to 2 dry pile batteries. It's been ringing since 1840. It's not a perpetual motion machine, but it might be the closest thing we've come to one. So yeah, similar to the PDE, the bell's on display at a university, but here's the thing about this experiment that's kind of wild. We don't know how it works. A battery, sure, as you can see in the pic, there's 2 dry pile batteries sitting side by side, but nobody's ever opened them up, and nobody knows really who made it. Robert Walker, who was a physics professor at the University of Oxford, he got his hands on the dry pile in the early 1800s, and all we know is that it was manufactured at a London firm called Watkins and Hill, but there are no records that show how it was made. So the bells are fixed below the piles, and a ball hangs between the bells, and the ball is attracted by a charge in one bell and then the other, kind of striking lightly back and forth, and it does this once every quarter second. And if you do the math around that, it comes out to about 10 billion rings that this thing's done. But why are these bells still ringing after more than 180 years? Like, somebody could find out if they would take it apart, but nobody wants to do that because that would end the experiment. The batteries will run down eventually, unless something is fundamentally wrong with our understanding of physics. Another famous example of stubborn longevity is a centennial light in Livermore, California. This one does kind of stretch the definition of what an experiment is. This was not designed as an experiment, but it's worth talking about. It's basically a carbon filament light bulb that's been glowing inside this fire station since 1901. It's way dimmer than it used to be, but it still works. And it's thought that the bulb has survived because it was built before manufacturers made the decision to make their light bulbs shittier. So you might have heard of the term planned obsolescence. That's basically what this is. And it is a literal thing that happened. So in 1924, a group of light bulb manufacturers met at a conference to kind of decide the future of their industry. It was still a very new thing, right? And they decided that the future of their industry was in trouble because people only bought one light bulb and it lasted forever. And this is a problem if you make your money selling light bulbs. So they all agreed to roll back the lifespan of light bulbs to have them burn out after about 1,000 hours of use. Now, their public reasoning was that by shortening their lifespan, it could make them brighter and more attractive. Take that with however much salt you want. But the centennial bulb was made before this. And there's nothing special about it. It was just called a bulb at the time, but it's held up as a perfect example of planned obsolescence. Thankfully, that's not an idea that caught on to other industries. I'll check back one more time, see how our drop's doing. Man, this is worse than the Times Square New Year's Eve drop. Taking forever, man. Somewhere in the world, somebody is just staring at this webcam all day, every day. So one of the most important lessons that we can take from these long-running experiments is that they're worth doing, or at least I think they're worth doing. All these people involved planted trees whose shade is beneficial today. And they've inspired the current generation of scientists to keep thinking ahead as well. For example, a collection of scientists from the UK, Germany, and the US are interested in how long bacteria can survive in a dormant state. So to find out, they sealed hundreds of vials of spores in 2014, and they plan to unseal them over the course of 500 years. The plan is for 3 vials to be opened every 2 years over the next 24-year span, and then 3 more every 25 years until June 30th, 2514. The whole idea came about when Charles Cockerell at the University of Edinburgh, he found a petri dish of bacteria that had been just kind of sitting in a box for like 10 years. And he found that some of the bacteria were still viable, which, made him wonder just how long they could possibly survive. So they call this the 500-year microbiology experiment, and they actually published results for their first vial sets in 2018. So far, so good. And they're also making instructions for how to time-proof the experiment. So since technology changes so fast, something like a USB stick is unlikely to survive. So they're actually asking every 25 years or so for them to write down all of their findings on archival paper. Can't beat the classics. Finally, here's a little blast from the past. About 10 years ago, I made a video about something called the Clock of the Long Now. I called it, quote, an ambitious monumental project from the Long Now Foundation. I just quoted me. Well, since I did that video, clock builders have actually started construction on this thing. They've installed their first timekeeping components underground. That happened in 2018, and it's on land that's owned by Jeff Bezos near Van Horn, Texas. Which, that site was actually supposed to just be a prototype site, but in 2024 they decided to just build the real deal there. It'll be powered by temperature change on the top of the mountain, and the clock will also resync to the solar time every solstice using shifts in light as a cue. Now, given the subtle nature of its operation, it actually won't have power to display the time. So then in order to see what time it is, visitors will have to basically wind some chimes. And when they do that, each chime will play a different composition that's created by Brian Eno, which is a nice little treat. A little thank you for winding the clock. Which you would want to reward people for visiting, because the Clock of the Long Now is located in some of the roughest desert wilderness in North America, inhabited by rattlesnakes and mountain lions, and that is from their website. It's kind of interesting because they're relying on tourists to wind the thing, but they specifically put it in a place that's hard to get to, so it doesn't draw too many tourists. Which I imagine you probably wouldn't want a crowd of people visiting this thing on a regular basis. You know, all the dust, the fingerprints, oils that build up over time. And someone's gonna tag this thing, you know they are. See, kind of from the builder's perspective, the less we hear about the Clock of the Long Now in the 21st century, the better. It's really meant to be something for future people to explore. And who knows, maybe it'll be easier to get there with their jetpacks and time and space portals. So I think I'll wrap up this video by asking you, what seeds of knowledge would you like to plant for the future? Yeah, if there's one lesson that we can learn from everything that's happening today, it's that we can get kind of caught up in the moment, but it's good to keep an eye on the future. So yeah, is there anything that you would like to see scientifically tested over longer than a lifetime? Are there any experiments in this video that you'd like to see the results of? Maybe live long enough to see it? Let me know in the comments. I'd like to think that what I'm doing here on YouTube is planting seeds of knowledge for all you guys and giving you interesting stuff to consider. And while I know I'm not perfect, I do try to, get my facts right. That's important to me, and it's getting harder and harder to do these days. A lot of misinformation out there, a lot of biases from different media outlets. So yeah, whenever some big news is breaking and everybody's talking about it on the socials, I always go and double check the discourse on ground news. Because ground news doesn't just aggregate news stories from all over the world, they do that, but they give you information about the sources you're reading, so you can have a more clear picture of the doom you're scrolling past. Like, take this story on Elon Musk announcing Tesla's Terafab project to increase chip production and put data centers in space. Over 150 sources reported on this story, with even split coverage from the left and the right. If I scroll down to all the articles, I can easily see that left-leaning outlets use words like outlandish and desperate and a distraction, while right-leaning outlets highlight how it could help the US to retain technological supremacy. Elon always splits a crowd. And that's good just to have, a more well-rounded view on the issues, but ground news goes way further than that. What if I told you only 13% of the sources that covered the story are owned by independent news? It's important to know who owns the sources you're reading, because increasingly media companies are merging and they're owned by moneyed interests that have their own stock price to protect. That creates inherent biases, but with ground news, you can see who owns what and know what conflicts of interest they might have. And all their sources are rated for accuracy by 3 different independent news monitoring organizations, so you can separate the legit sources from the tabloid slop. Feels pretty important nowadays. I'm also a big fan of their blind spot feature that checks your own biases by showing news stories that are being completely ignored by one side or the other, because, it's not just how they're covering the stories, it's the stories they aren't covering in the first place. I think a tool like this is increasingly necessary in our current media environment, so if you'd like to see what it's all about and get more information about your information, you can go to ground.news/Joe Scott and sign up for their Vantage plan, that's the one that I use, and you can get 40% off their annual plan. I would argue that's a small price to pay for being better informed about the world. It helps you out, it helps the world out, and it does support this channel, so go give it a look. Links down in the description. Anyway, sorry for the fake out. Thanks you guys for watching. If this is your first time here, maybe check out this video. Maybe I'll put the one about the Clock of the Long Now up there so you can go see what I was talking about. But you can watch that one. You can watch any of the other videos that have my face on them. And if you enjoy them, I invite you to subscribe. I come back with videos every Monday. Also, I have to do this thing where I ask you guys to click the bell. I haven't been asking for that much lately, but I've been getting a lot of comments from people who say that they're not been getting my videos and their recommendations and whatnot. So that will help for you to see more of my stuff if you happen to not see any of them lately. As always, copies of my book, The Book of Mysteries, is available at laughsmarter.com. Also, the t-shirt that I'm wearing, if you like it, find that there, as well as many others. Help support the channel, and you can find some cool stuff, so go check it out. But that's it for today. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.